Omer. Public service announcement. There's some good apps out there for your phones to remind you every day what the Sphera is. Just saying. Since I've had the apps, I haven't miscounting. Okay, second line from the top. Yitzhak Aleph. Shabbos and Yom Tov is a problem. Tana Rabbanan. Kli shenit b'meir of Yom Tov. Ein matbilin oto ben hashmasha. So we've been talking about the fact that you can't do tefillas kelim on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And all these technical differences or between whether it was or not so technical, whether it became tamei on yontiv or before yontiv, whether you're doing it to focus on the water, which is allowed, or the kli, which is not allowed. Now we deal with a question about suffix. So it became tamei on erev yontiv. You can't do it bein hashmashos because it might already be yontiv, and then you can't do it. It's an issur d'Rabbanan. So, ein matbil also ben hashmashos. Rabbi Shimon Shizuri Omer, af b'cholin matbilin osom. Nen shetar herek shemesh. Even on a weekday, we wouldn't let somebody do it ben hashmashos because it needs nightfall to be tahor, right? The same way a person who goes to the mikvah, he's only fully tahor at nightfall. So if you put a kli in the mikvah, it's only fully tahor when it becomes nightfall. By the way, I should mention that's not relevant for us, for like when a woman who's a nida goes to the mikvah, because this residual tum'ah only has relevance for eating truma and kudshim. So nevertheless, it needs erev shemesh. So what's the problem? So the problem is that if this guy does it right before nightfall, he's going to, or right at bein hashmashos. So Rashi says it sounds like he's ready to. Why is he doing it at this time? Obviously, because he wants to use it tonight. So he's going to use it tonight. It's obvious. It's clear. He's not going to have erev shemesh because he only dunked it in the mikvah bein hashmashos. It might already be night. So therefore, we shouldn't let a person use the mikvah when it's already bein hashmashos. According to that logic, also, we shouldn't let them use the mikvah at night because it shows that they want to use it tonight. Although obviously, you can understand that bein hashmashos is particularly problematic. If they use it at night, they realize it doesn't have erev shemesh. If they're using it bein hashmashos, they persuade themselves that they got it in while it was still daytime, and then it became night. Maybe they'll say, well, maybe tseis is erev shemesh. So doing it bein hashmashos, you will allow you to fall into this trap of not waiting till it's fully nightfall or till it's the next night in order to use it. So Rabbi Shimon Shizuri doesn't want to allow a person to use it. Again, it's quite interesting because who are the people that need to wait to erev shemesh? As I said, it's only if you're eating truma or kudshim. How many of those are really not going to know the halacha? But as I said, maybe it's not knowing the halacha. Maybe it's persuading yourself that you got it in before it became nightfall, and therefore you got erev shemesh when you really did not. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this: the Tana Kama lo by erev shemesh. So the Tana Kama doesn't require it, meaning question mark exclamation point. How does he address this concern about doing it during the weekday at bein hashmashos? So Amar Rava ashkechinu l'Rabbanan debei Rav. I found the rabbis, meaning the rabbinic students in the yeshiva, the Yasvi V'Karmi, and they were sitting and saying, Amri, we can say, the debate is how much can you see a person's intentions through his actions? Meaning, how much, by the way, is he acting? Does that indicate that he knows what's going on, and therefore we don't have to have this concern? What's the case? You see him taking a vessel in his hands, and he's running, and it's like it's already bein hashmashos, and he's running to get to the mikvah. So you see, though, that he's running, he clearly understands that there's some urgency. So Mar Savar Haidaka Roif Azo made the Yad to buy erev shemesh. So the approach that says we let him do it bein hashmashos. Again, this is during the week. We let him do it. It says, look, the fact that he's running shows that he understands that he's got to get there before nightfall if he wants the nightfall to count as erev shemesh. So from his actions, it's clear he knows what the halacha is. So we don't have to tell him he can't do it bein hashmashos. Now, of course, if he knows he needs erev shemesh and he gets there, it's already bein hashmashos. Why is he doing it? So Rashi says, no, he gets there, he realizes he missed the time, but then he's already at the mikveh with his kli, so he's going to use it. But the fact that he was running to get to the mikveh right before sunset shows he understands the importance of sunset, and we don't have to make a gzeira. Umar savar machmas malachtahu dekarahid. People run because they have a job to do, they have work, they can't waste time. It doesn't prove that he understands the importance of sunset. Okay, so that's the question: do we really have to make a gzeira if somebody's doing it bein hashmashos? And they said the question is, most of the time you'll see somebody running to get there, whatever. It's clear he knows what the halacha is. He understands the issues. You don't have to make a gzeira. And the other says it's not always so clear. That's what the rabbinic student said. And I said to them, no, that we can sort of interpret a person's intentions through his actions. Everybody agrees that we don't debate that. Pligi, what would be the debate? I mean, and that we could assume we can see his intentions and that he's aware that it needs nightfall. Pligi, what would the debate be? He's going to itmi b'pachos mikiyadasha. Not a case of guy running. Something became tamei with less than an adasha, less than like a bean size, a lentil size of a dead bug, a dead rodent. And he went to the rabbi to ask, does this become tamei if it touched something, a rodent smaller than the size of a kiyadasha? Now the answer is no, it didn't. But he had another kli that he had to be tovel. But he came to ask about this kli. So Mar Savar me the halo gamir. Look, the guy's such an amaretz. He doesn't know this halacha of pachos mikiyadasha. So Herev Shemesh Nami lo gamir. So he also wouldn't know the halacha that you needed nightfall. So this type of a guy, we're not going to allow to use the mikvah ve'elash mashos because clearly he doesn't know laws of tumatara. Umar Savar, and the other one holds, no, hahu delo gamir. That halacha of the minimum size, that he doesn't know. So Rashi says that's not written anywhere in the Torah. I have shemish gamar, but the fact that you need nightfall to make it fully Torah, that he could know. That's a more common halacha that's written in the Torah and so on. I have to say, this whole thing is very bizarre because it's talking about a highly specific case. Like, are we talking about making a gezerah? Are we talking about giving advice to somebody? And if he's right there and asking you about pachos mikiyadasha, so tell him, by the way, don't use the mikvah tonight because it's going to require Erev Shemesh. So what does it mean? It means it's not this case, it's another case. So we're going to it's crazy. What are we talking about? Identifying individuals based on their knowledge and ignorance and then telling them whether they can use the mikvah. It's like we have a policy whether you can use the mikvah once it's already sunset. You have to answer a quiz, and if you do well on the quiz, I don't really understand whether we're talking about a gzeira, an attitude. Maybe we're talking about a general attitude, but I don't know. All right, I will say something else, which is the phrase "machshavtom nikeres mitoch masav" is interesting because it's also used in very different contexts, like a question about a minor, and can you assume a minor has das in halacha or doesn't have das, or has kavana, doesn't, and how much that you can sort of judge a person's intentions. Here it's basically judging your intentions. We understand you're a bar das, but we want to get to what you're thinking. But there's another question about just using it to assess how much intelligence a minor does have. If you see them acting in an intelligent way and in a way that's thoughtful and planned and so on, whether that then becomes relevant for halachic purposes as well.
It's actually bizarre because we're saying that here's a person that doesn't know the halacha well enough, so we'll make up a new halacha.
Right, exactly, to make sure there's something else they don't know. Exactly. Right, that's a good point too. How will they ever know the halacha you're not supposed to do a beinosh mashas unless we're in control of the mikvahs and we turn them away. All right, now the last line of the Mishnah was very vague. It said you can be tovel, although you can't be tovel on Shabbos and Yontiv, you can be tovel from back to back and from chabura to chabura, from group to group. What does that mean? So Tana Rabbanan, our rabbis taught, this is a Tosefta. Ketza migav l'gav. What does it mean from back to back? Harotza lasos kito al gav. Now our girsa is kado, which is your pitcher, but probably the better girsa is bado, bad, a base habad. So a gat, right, and a base habad is the cases of a gat is like where you press olives, and a base habad is where you press grapes. So the point is that you were mitaher your kalim because you were going to make olive oil, and you wanted to use them for your olive press, and you wanted it to be pure. You wanted it to sell it to kohanim or whatever, and then you decided I'm going to use these vessels not in my olive press. I'm going to use them in my wine press. Okay, now of course the point is who cares? Like they're tahor. It's not like you're going from truma to kachim with different levels of kedusha, of tahara. So the point is, you're right. You don't really need to take them to the mikvah again. But you, for some reason, like every time you get ready to use your wine press, you take all the vessels to the mikvah. And every time you get ready to use your olive press, you take all your vessels to the mikvah. So you took all your olive press vessels to the mikvah. Now you want to reuse it for your wine press. So those so you want to be tovel them. So you want to do that on Yantav Gesundheit hate. It doesn't even need. You don't need to do it. So you want to do it. Be my guest. Okay. V'kado, or your vessel, or it should be ubado agav gito osa. You can do it because you really don't need it to do it at all anyway. So you want to do it because of the hate. Ketzah michabur lechabur. What does it mean from one group to the next? Hayaocha b'chabur zov. V'rotza lecho b'chabur acharet. You were eating with one group and you wanted to go eat with another group. Now the whole use of the phrase chabura, Rashi says specifically, is al pischo. Okay, and now once you started eating with one group, you're actually not allowed to take a Pesach michabura lechabura. So hayaocha must mean you intended to eat with one group, and then you changed your mind and you wanted to eat with another group. Harshus biyado. So you want to now say, oh, I have to tova my kalim to be together with this group. Somehow you had that in your head that you have to be tova your kalim new whenever you're joining a group. So maybe again that was your practice. Whenever you're about to join a Pesach group, you bring your kalim to the mikvah because you want it all to be tar for the Pesach. So now it's before the shechita. Now you switched groups, so you wanted to bring him again. So that type of a thing you can go at, well, I don't know, because it's on Yontif, or maybe it's Shabbos before Yontif. But anyway, okay. So that type of thing you're allowed to do. Now, I have to tell you, on the one hand, okay, this is obvious. It's not a halachic tefillah. But given all of the concerns that were raised, maybe you'll come to carry it, maybe it'll look like you're metaking. Every single one of those concerns is just as relevant in this case, even though you're doing it for a nourish purpose, right? So again, gets to the point that the Gemara raised before, that the concerns are just as relevant, but somehow in some formalistic way, this isn't a halachic tefillah. And since it isn't a halachic tefillah, it's going to be allowed. The same way, there's no obvious difference whether it became tamei erev yantiv or on yantiv, or whether it became tamei with an avatuma or a sheni latuma. And somehow still we allow some and we don't allow others. So it's very hard to understand, given the nature of whatever the concerns were, why we make these distinctions. But again, since technically this is not really a tefillah that does anything, we allow it. Okay. So that was an interesting little digression about Tevilah. Now we get back to what I would say some more direct Yontiv issues and at the biblical level as well. And here's a very famous debate around Yontiv. Beit Shammai says, Miviyim shlomim ve'ein tzomchen aleim. You can bring shlomim on Yontif, free will offerings, right, which you eat the meat, because then you're going to eat the meat, so that's a tzorech Yontif. But you cannot do smicha on them. Smicha is putting your hands on the korbanot, and the problem with that is that you'd be resting your weight on the animal. It's like using an animal on Yontif, a rabbinic concern. Of a low olot, you cannot bring burnt offerings because you don't get any food benefit from it. You can bring you can bring shlamim, which Beit Shammai didn't disagree, but two, you can also bring olot, even though you won't eat from them. And you can do smich on them. You can rest your weight on them. So at this level, their debate. So the debate is, number one, can you bring an olah, even though you won't be able to eat from it? Is bringing the korban a legitimate use to do malacha on yantiv? And number two, can you do smicha? Can you rest your weight on it? Is that a concern or not? Now, people might be familiar that this is like one of the earliest debates, or maybe the earliest debate recorded debate in rabbinic history, right? And in the Chagiga, there's a whole list of the Nasi and Beit Av going back hundreds of years that were always debating this issue of do you do smicha on shlomim when you bring them on yantiv? So I really just have to comment and say, I don't know why, of all things, this was the one thing that was debated. First of all, like, it's a rabbinic point. It's not, the issue of smicha. The olah might be biblical. Is that a malacha or not, bringing an olah on yantiv? But the smicha is a rabbinic point. And I don't know why, of all things, that's the one that was debated. And it's also worth noting, since I mentioned this earlier, but I'll mention it again, how much all of Maseches Beitzah, almost all of Maseches Beitzah, are debates of Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai. Right? If you think about it, almost every single Mishnah was a debate of Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai. Whether it's Doraisa, it's about tarrying, bringing korbanot, whether it's Drabanans, about the egg, and about the Eruv Tavshilin, pretty much every single thing we've seen is a Mishnah Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai. Very, very rare that you have that, and this is almost the entire Masechet. So I don't know why it is, but it seems that there's a lot of early material around issues of Yom Tov. So I just note that without really having a good explanation.
This is an obvious point, but smicha is not knocking.
Smicha is not knocking, that's true. Oh, yes, and that's why Beit Shammai says it's possible to bring without doing smicha. That is correct. Okay, So let's try to refine exactly what this debate is. Amar Ula says Ula, machlokas b'shlami chagiga lismoch v'olas re'iyah likarev. Which type of shlamim and which type of olas are we talking about? So Ula says they're debating when the Beit Hillel says you can bring shlamim, and Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai say you can bring shlamim. They're talking about shlami chagiga, right? It says every time the Torah says you should make it like chag lahashem. Right? Chag hamatzot, chag hasukot, v'chagosemo so chag laHashem. What does it mean to make it into a chag? So Chazal understand it means that there's an obligation specifically to bring a shlamim, which is called a shlamei chagiga, shlamim because of the rejoicing of the chag, and that's an obligation to bring on Yontiv. And if you don't bring it on Yontiv, then you can bring it on Chol HaMoed. So when is it that Beit Shammai will concede that you can bring a shlamim on Yontiv? That's only for shlamei chagiga. I should point out that there's one Yontiv that you have to bring it on Yontiv, and you can't bring it on Chol HaMoed, which is Shavuos. So if Chag means Shlomei Chagiga, right, everybody has to agree that you can bring Shlomei Chagiga on Yontiv. And that has two things. Number one is it's a chiyuv of the day. And number two is that you eat from it. So it's certainly something that can be done on Yontiv. Okay, although again, it could be the Yevid be done on Chol HaMoed, on Pesach and Shavu and Sukkot. So Shlomei Chagiga is the one that they both agree can be brought. And Lismoch, the debate is whether you can do smicha. Now, how about the issue about what ola does Beit Hillel say you can bring? Similarly, the ola re'iyah likarev. The debate about the ola is the ola re'iyah. When it says Yera'eh kol zechorcha, all your males should appear before God, we are talking about a ola re'iyah, about an ola that is brought to show, like to bring your presence. V'lo yera'u panai rekam, you shall not see my face empty-handed. It's through the bringing of an ola. Okay, so that again is an obligation of the Chag, and that's where Beit Hillel says you can bring it, and Beit Shammai says you cannot. Now, I actually a little bit misstated, or not, before, because what do you do on if what I said before was correct, that you have to bring it on Shavuos only on Yontiv itself? Then according to Beit Shammai, how are you ever yotzei re'iyah on Yontiv on Shavuos? Right, you have to come 3 regalim, lo yera'u panai rekam. So you have to bring an ola, and he doesn't let you bring an olas re'iyah on Yontiv. So the halacha is that the same way on Pesach and Sukkot, you have days after the first day Yontiv to make it up if you miss your Shlamei Chagiga. With the Chazal learned that the same is true by Shavuot. So according to Beit Shammai, you would never actually do your obligation of Ola Re'iyah on Shavuot itself. You would only do it in the days after Shavuot that we learn out from the extra days of Pesach and Sukkot. Okay, so there is opportunities for makeup even for Shavuot. So what he's saying is the whole possibility of bringing korbanot is the korbanot of the Chag. The Shlamei Chagiga, everybody agrees you can bring because it has a chiyuv of the Chag and you can eat from it. The whole debate is doing smicha. And Olas Re'iyah, where you're not eating from it, that's the debate of Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai. Do you bring it on the Yontiv or do you bring it on the days following Yontiv? Now, what's that debate about? To Beit Shammai Savri, v'chagosemo so chag laHashem. You should make it into a festival for God. Chagiga so it's chag. That's what you have to do. Olas re'iyah lo. So he presumably understands that the double language of chagosem oso chag means on the chag itself, on the yontiv itself is when you bring the chagiga, but the ola isn't mentioned. You don't bring the ola. Beit Hillel Savri and Beit Hillel holds laHashem. No, it says chag laHashem. Kol de laHashem, anything that is for God, any korban, and not any korban, but any korban of the chag that is for God can be brought. Aval nidarim v'nidavos Tivi Akro ain't craving beyond Tov. But when it comes to free will offerings that's not related to the Chag, everybody would say you don't bring it. Now I want to just remind you about putting this in a larger context. You'll remember before we had a whole debate about carrying on Yontiv between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, right? So, and the one way the Gemara read it, which seemed to be the way the Gemara was going, is do we say mitoch shehutra l'tzorech, hutra nami shelo l'tzorech? And the application was if you bring an olas nidava on Yontiv, do you get malchus or not? Where it says you get malchus for Beit Shammai, but not for Beit Hillel. So although here the Gemara is saying that even Beit Hillel agrees you don't bring an olas nidava, it might be that if you did bring it, you would not have violated. Okay, so Beit Hillel's more lenient approach is consistent with an earlier Gemara idea that Beit Hillel holds of mitoch. And once you can do shchita for food purposes, you can do it even for ola, even for korbanot, and maybe even if you did an olas nedava, you wouldn't get malchus. Whereas Beit Shammai basically does not hold of mitoch, and he only allows it for food, and he only allows, if you're going to do it in the context of a korban, he only allows it if it is a shlamim chagiga. Let me say one other word about that. Why should Beit Shammai not want you to bring any shlamim, even a shlamim nedava? I mean, you're going to eat from it, so why is it different than just shechting in my backyard? What, I'm not going to eat from the entrails and the fat? I wouldn't eat from the entrails and the fat anyway, so why can't I just bring the shlamim nedava? Why only shlamim chagiga? And the, what?
There's so much meat already, you're not going to be able to eat it.
So I can't shecht a cow. I can only shecht a chicken. I mean, we had shechting cows before. So it seems that the difference is that that's only eating from a shlamim is seen as the eating is seen as a secondary intent. The primary purpose of a shlamim is still bringing it as a korban, or at least it's not the primary. Maybe it's some joint, or it's eating it in the context of a korban. It's not just eating it because to fill my stomach. Okay. Now again, that's quite funny because you would think if there's any sense of joining the idea of simcha and achasher yachel chol nefesh on yantiv, bring a shlamim chagiga would be the best way to eat meat on yantiv, right? So it is. We should note that it is a little bit ironic that Beit Shammai, even if they don't hold of mitoch, according to this, don't want you to bring a shlamim. According to this, even Beit Hillel wouldn't want you to bring a shlamim if it wasn't shlamim simcha. If it was just stam a shlamim. Okay, but again, that's because presumably a shlamim simcha is when you get those two coming together. It's a shlamim, but it's in the context of simcha sachag, and that brings it all together. But if it's not a shlamim, well, we'll get to shlamim simcha later. We're talking about shlamim chagiga. Okay, so anyway, I'm digressing too much. Let's get back. So it says like this. He says that they debate the korbanos of the chag, but if it's simple nedarim and nedavos, hakrol ain't craving b'yontav. Everybody would say you don't bring it on yontav because that is, even though you'll eat from the meat, that's not related to the chag. And as I said before, even if Beit Hillel holds of mitoch and b'di'ev, it might be okay, but certainly lechatchila, those you do not bring on yontav, even though you'll eat from the meat, because fundamentally it's about bringing a korban. Free will sacrifices, nobody says you can bring on the yontav. The whole issue here is the ola and the shlamim that is related specifically to the chag. Meisvei says, well, I'll ask you on this. I'm Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Lo nechlu go beis Shammai beis Hillel al ola she'ena shel yom tov, she'ena kreivim yom tov. So nobody disagreed that if the ola was not an obligation of yontiv, it wasn't an ola sri'iyah, that you do not bring it. Okay, that has nothing. It's A, not related to yontiv, and B, you don't eat from it. So everybody agrees an unrelated ola you do not bring. Okay, so far it's what we've been saying. But here he says different than we said before. If it's a shlamim that is of a yontav, meaning a shlamim chagiga, it also, by the way, would include a shlamim simcha, which we'll see about. Even Beit Shammai would agree. Everybody agrees you do bring it on yontav. Aman nechlaku. What do they debate? Al ola shisho yom tov, al shlamim she'enam shel yom tov. If the ola was a yontav ola, which is ola sriya, and shlamim, which is not related to yontav. Beit Shammai amim lo yavi. Beit Hillel amim yavi. Beit Shammai says you can't bring, and Beit Hillel says you can bring. So in which way is this different than what we said before? How it's different is that this has Beit Hillel saying you can even bring shlamim she'enam shel yom tov. Okay, and he said that before that even Beit Hillel would agree that if it's not yontav related, you cannot bring it. So we're not even getting to that yet. I mean, that also seems subtly to be part of the difference as well. That he says there was no debate of a shlamim that was shel yontav, which might mean that they would also agree you could do smicha. But we're not focusing right now on smicha. We're just focusing on the bringing of it.
Just an interesting shift, right? The Talmudic material has been re-emphasized.
Right. Well, we'll get back to the smicha later, but we first want to figure out the basic parameters. Okay. So the first approach of Ula was they're only discussing the korbanos of the chag. So even when they discuss whether or not you do smicha on a shlamim, etc., they're only the korbanos of the chag. And if it's not of the chag, even Beis Hillel would say you cannot bring it. And this approach says no, that actually they're also that's true about the ola. Nobody would think you could bring an ola that's not of the chag. But when it comes to shlamim, like I was saying before, why should shlamim be a problem? So that also is part of the debate. Beis Hillel says it's fine to bring a shlamim even if it's not a shlamim of the chag. So how do you deal with that? So the Gemara says, "Tarz ve'emahachi." All right, reinterpret it. It's not just going to be reinterpreting. We're going to change the text. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, lo nechlu beis Shammai beis Hillel ola vishlamim. she'enim shel yontav she'en craving b'yom tov. Okay, so we're going to switch the text, and we're going to have him say what Ula said. If it's not a yontav korban, even a shlamim, everybody agrees it cannot be brought. V'al shlamim she'en shel yom tov she'craving b'yom tov, and everybody agrees that if it is two things that are good, it's shlamim and it's related to the chag, that it can't be brought. The only thing they debated about bringing, as opposed to smincha, was the ola, that was a yantav ola. Okay, so basically what we did is we cut and pasted in order to get it to be the same as ula. But the simple sense of that Beitzah has that Beit Hillel would allow you to bring a shlamim even if it wasn't shel yantav, for the reason I said before, that at least the shlamim, you're eating the meat. So that right now is the question. When Beit Hillel lets you bring nobody thinks that Beit Hillel lets you bring an ola that's not related, because you're not eating the meat and it's not related. The question is, would Beit Hillel let you bring a shlamim that is not a yantav shlamim? Rav Yosef Amar, now Rav Yosef's response to this Beitzah that contradicted Ula was, Tanai Shekalta Me'ala, what, you're just grabbing Tanaim out of the air? Meaning, okay, you found a Tana that disagreed with Ula. It's not like there are no other Tanaim in the world. So, Tanai, it's a debate of Tanaim. Titania, we turn to Beitzah, Shlamim Abayim Machmas Yom Tov, Bi Yom Tov, Shlamim that come for the sake of Yom Tov, Shlami Chagiga or Shlami Simchas, we'll see, that is brought on Yom Tov. Beitzah Yomim Somech Aleim Erev Yom Tov, V'Shochtan. So do the smicha on Erev Yom Tov, but you can't do it on Yom Tov. V'Shochtan Bi Yom Tov, but those you can bring on Yom Tov. No, you can even do the smicha. But meaning, what they're debating is a yontav shlamim, right? Everybody agrees that you can bring it. The question is, can you do smicha? Aval, says the Beitzah, nidarim v'nidavos, free will sacrifices that are not related to yontav, divya kro ain't craving b'yontav. Everybody would agree could not be brought. Okay, and that supports Ula's contention. So here we have the issue. Ula that is not related to yontav, everybody agrees you cannot bring it. That's no question, okay? Although, again, I reminded you that we said earlier that according to Beit Hillel, if you did bring an ola, it could be that you don't get malchus because of mitoch. But certainly everybody agrees l'chatchila if the ola is not related to yontav, you don't bring it. Everybody also agrees that the debate of Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai about an ola is about the olas re'iyah, the ola that you have to bring. That Beit Hillel would say the fact that you have to bring it allows it to be brought, chag laHashem, and Beit Shammai says no, bring it tomorrow. Okay, that's the debate that we all agree on relating to ola, the ola of olas re'iyah. The question is, what's the issue of the shlamim that they both are conceding can be brought? Is it only shlamei chagiga, and every other shlamim that's not yontav related, everybody agrees cannot be brought? Or does Beit Hillel go so far to allow you to bring even shlamim that is not related to yontav? Because in the end of the day, you're going to be eating the food. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this: V'hani tanai ki hani tanai. These tanaim that are debating the question of bringing a shlamim that is not a yontav shlamim, but bringing it on yontav, is like the following debate of tanaim. The time we turn to Beitzah. Ein mevin toda b'chag hamatzos mipnei chametz shaba. Okay, that's pretty obvious. You don't bring a toda, which is a type of a shlamim, but it's only eaten for one day, and it comes with loaves of matzah and chametz, and it's specifically for the sake of Thanksgiving. You don't bring it on Pesach because you can't bring the chametz that's part of that korban. But guess what? You also can't bring it on Shavuot, because there's no Chol HaMoed on Shavuot, and you can't bring it on Yantav, which reflects the fact that a shlamim that is not Nachmas Yantav, that is not connected directly to Yantav, cannot be brought on Yantav, right? Because there's no way to bring a Toda on Shavuot. So, maybe Adam Todasa b'Chag HaSukkos. If you have a Toda, you need to bring it on Sukkos. Okay. Rabbi Shimon Omer, that's the Tana Kama. Rabbi Shimon says, Harei Omer, the pasuk says, B'Chag HaMatzos, B'Chag HaShavuos, B'Chag HaSukkos. So it connects all of these three korbanot. Okay, all three chagim, right? V'lo yor panai rekam. Kol sheba b'Chag HaMatzos, ba b'Chag HaShavuos, B'Chag HaSukkos. Anything that can be brought on Pesach can be brought on Shavuos and Sukkos. Because Shaloba b'Chag HaMatzos, and if it can't be brought on Pesach, Einu ba b'Chag HaShavuos b'Chag HaSukkos cannot be brought on Shavuos and Sukkos. Which sounds like he's saying, the Gemara is going to try to understand what he means, but it sounds like he's saying, since you can't bring a Toda on Pesach, you can't bring it on Sukkos either. The Gemara is going to say, what? You can't bring a korban on Chol HaMoed? Sukkos? Like, why not? But that's what it sounds like he's saying. By the way, Tosa switches the girsa, and Tosa says it really should read, Kol sheba b'Chag HaMatzos u'b'Chag HaShavuos, ba b'Chag HaSukkos. Because if you can't bring it on Pesach and on Shavuos, you also can't bring it on Sukkot. Okay, the Gemara will try to figure out what that means. We'll put that aside for a moment. Yes.
Is this the only korban that has chametz that goes with it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, we still so far do not seem to have debated the fact that you cannot bring a toda on Shavuot, which because it is a shlomim not related to the Chag. Rabbi Linzer Reb Shimon Omer, maybe adam todasu b'Chag HaSukkos v'yotze bo yidei chavaso mishum simcha ve'ein yotze bo mishum chagiga. Now, this also does not seem to be an issue that was debated before. He's just pointing out that if you brought your Toda on Sukkot, which is when everybody says you can bring it, you fulfill your obligation of Simcha, but not of Chagiga. What does that mean? It means the following, and I was maybe throwing it in before a little bit too soon. There are two types of shlamim that are related to Yantav. One is a shlame Chagiga. A shlame Chagiga is based on the pasuk of V'chagos emoso Chag. What it means to do a Chag is to bring a shlamim that represents the Chag. The other is a shlame Simcha, which is a kiyum of the pasuk of Ustesamachta atal veitecha, like Simchas Yantav. Now, the fact that it's a kiyum of Simcha has mostly to do with the fact that you're going to eat the meat. Meaning, let's say you brought a shlamim and you didn't eat the meat, are you really yotzei or not? Or let's say somebody invited you to eat from their shlamei simcha. There, it's much more about eating the meat than about bringing the korban, but specifically the meat of a korban, not just stam meat, but the meat in the context of, God, and the meat in the context of a korban. That's what a shlamei simcha is, and that's the idea. Like when we learned in Sukkot that the mitzvah of simcha applies throughout the regel and so on. Specifically, it's in the context of shlamei simcha, which is why Chazal say that nowadays that we don't have korbanot. How do you translate what that simcha means? So it says men is with wine, women is with clothes, kids are with nuts. That's famous Gemara about that, by the way, which is, so the Rambam's gear says nowadays it's with meat and wine, but that's not our gear in the Gemara. Our gear is just nowadays it's with wine, which heads to the whole question of whether people feel you have to have fleishichs on Yantav or not. Okay, but that's the idea of shlamei simcha, which is, yes, it's bringing the shlamim, but it's much more focusing on the eating of the meat than on the bringing of it, which leads to this question of, can you fulfill your obligation of shlamei simcha by a standing obligation you had already? You had obligated yourself, you took some trip, it was a dangerous journey, you made a neder, you took some obligation to bring a korban toda, and you set aside and you sanctify an animal for your korban toda. Now you waited until the regel to bring it, because that's when you're going up to Yerushalayim anyway. Can you use this korban toda, which is a type of a shlamim, and bring it and say, I'll get 2 for the price of 1, I'll bring my toda, I'll eat the meat, it'll count as a shlamei simcha, or I'll bring it and it'll count as a shlamei chagiga? And the answer is, you can get 2 for the price of 1 for shlamei simcha, but not for shlamei chagiga. Why? Because by shlamei simcha, as we said, it's not so much about bringing the korban. It's more about eating meat that was brought as a korban. So therefore, it's not like there's no problem. I fulfill my obligation of a toda, and then I use the meat, and I'm doing also my obligation of simcha on the regel. Whereas by shlamei chagiga, it's an obligation to bring a korban chagiga, and you cannot fulfill one obligation with another obligation. If you have a standing obligation, you can only fill it from something that is not already pre-assigned to satisfy a pre-existing obligation. So that's what he says. Maybe when you eat from your toda, that counts as your mitzvah of simcha on Yantav. It's simcha from the korban that was a shlamim that was brought on Yantav, and there the obligation was more the eating and not the bringing. But you don't fulfill your obligation for chagiga because you can't use one obligation to satisfy another obligation. Okay.
The Pesach is just like a shlamim, right?
Yeah.
It's like a shlamei simcha. Because the eating is the
except that the Pesach was shechted on Erev Pesach.
Right.
And actually, you have to bring the korban on Yantav itself. Although you're right, it's a little bit funny based on the way I framed it, why that's true, but you do have to bring the korban on Yantav itself. It has to be somehow, it's not just eating meat. It's meat that connects to a korban that connects to the Chag, but it's true, but it's a good point. But yes, if you shechted it Erev Pesach, it wouldn't work. Okay, yes, now, yes.
The chagiga on Pesach, isn't the meat important because it's supposed to be full before
Yes.
you eat the Pesach?
So that's another function that is served by the chagiga that comes with the Pesach. That is true. The chagiga that comes with the Pesach is brought on Erev Pesach, so it's a different type of a chagiga. It's not this chagiga which is brought on Yantav itself. Okay? All right, so the Gemara says like this. Where are we? Okay, so now that doesn't seem relevant to our question either. The only thing that seemed relevant to our issue was, can you bring the Toda on Shavuot, which everybody seems to agree that you cannot, which seems to agree that you don't bring Shlomim that are not related to the Regel on the Regel. Let's see what the Gemara does with this, how it tries to say that this ties into our debate. Amar Mar. So, which is a way of saying, let's go back and unpack the Beitzah that we just quoted. Ein neviim Toda b'chag hamatzos mnei chametz Shabbat. You don't bring it on Pesach because of the chametz. Pshita, of course not. Amar Rav Bredi Rav Yitzchak v'Amilei Rav Shmuel bar Abba hachaber basar skinam. We're talking about not even bringing it on the 14th. That you can't bring it. Why not? You can eat the chametz at least at the beginning of the day, because savar ein mevim kakim lebeis psul. You do not bring sacrifices to become invalid. You don't bring sacrifices in a context which it'll be more make them susceptible or increase the likelihood that they'll be invalid. If you bring a toda the beginning of the morning of the 14th, you have very little time to eat all the chametz, and you're running the risk that not the meat will become pasul, but at least the loaves of bread, which are also part of the sacrifices, will become invalid, will have to be notar and have to be burnt, because you'll stop being able to eat them as soon as midday hits, which is, by the way, the reason we don't say Mizmor L'Toda on Erev Pesach, and why we don't say it on Pesach, because of the Chametz Shabbat, you don't even say it on Erev Pesach. Okay, so that's number one. When it says not on Pesach, it means even Erev Pesach. The lo be'atzeres means Shu Yom Tov, and you can't bring it on Shavuot because it's Yom Tov. So that clearly ties into our discussion. Kasavar nedavim v'nedavos ain't craving b'Yom Tov. That makes it clear that a shlamim, if it's not related to the Yom Tov, if it's something else like a Toda, cannot be brought on Yom Tov, which is like Ula wanted to say that both Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai agree that you do not bring unrelated shlamim on Yom Tov. Maybe Adam Todasu b'Chag HaSukkos, but you can bring it on Sukkos. Amos, when does this mean? Ilema b'Yom Tov Atzmo. If you mean Yom Tov, Marta v'lo be'atzeres nideshu Yom Tov. So this is pretty straightforward. You already said we can't bring it on Shavuos because it's Yom Tov. Ella, when it says you bring it on Sukkos, what does it mean? B'chol shamoe. Fine. So far, very straightforward. Now let's get to the slightly more complicated parts of that Beitzah. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Harei Omer, the pasuk says, "B'chag hamatzos, b'chag hashuos, b'chag hasukos." Kol Shabbat. I'll read this Tosfos' Girsa, which works better. Kol Shabbat b'chag hamatzos u b'chag hashavuot. If you can bring it on those two Yomim Tovim, ba b'chag hasukos. You can bring it on Sukkos. V'chol shelo ba b'chag hamatzos b'chag hasukos. Eino ba b'chag hasukot. Okay, and if you can't bring it on Pesach and Shavuot, you can't bring it on Sukkot. Which sounds like he's saying, if you can't bring the Toda on the first two holidays, you can't bring it on Sukkos, even on Chol HaMoed Sukkos, which is crazy. So Maskif la Reb Zera, Rav Zera asked on this. Hashta Saluse Misaltinan. I don't get it, says Rav Zera. We can gather wood from the forest to make a fire on Chol HaMoed. You can do things which really are, malacha related, as long as they are somehow, within the confines, within the parameters of Chol HaMoed. But you have a lot of latitude of what you can do on Chol HaMoed. And in Darvin and Davos Mibaya, and you're telling me that you can't bring certain types of korbanos? I mean, what a better time to bring korbanos than on Chol HaMoed, right? So you really are telling me you can't bring a toad on Chol HaMoed Sukkos just because you can't bring it on Pesach? So Amar Bai, so Bai says you're right. That's not what he was talking about. I mean, it sounded like that, but that's not what he was talking about. Bring your Toda on Chol HaMoed Sukkos. Nobody debates that. That's not what he was talking about. And what Abai says here is, and Rashi says he's not just making like an ukimta for this one line. He's really telling you what the whole point of this whole Beitzah was. Like, ask yourself, what was the point of this Beitzah? What was its basic focus? And Abai says the basic focus was the question of Baal Ta'acher. Right? The Torah says, Ki tidor neder l'Hashem Elokecha lo ta'acher l'shalmo. You cannot postpone satisfying your obligations to God, which means if you made a neder bringing a korban. And the question is, Chazal understand that that's related to the idea of the regalim, because it's on the regalim when you come to the Beis HaMikdash, which is your greatest opportunity to satisfy your obligations. And the assumption generally is, although we'll see in a minute, not everybody agrees, that you have a cycle of the regalim to bring it. The question is, when do you start counting the cycle? Is it shelo kisidron or only kisidron? Is it once there have been 3 regalim and you did not bring your korban, you were over on Baal Ta'acher, or only once you've gone through the cycle in the starting from the beginning,
Pesach.
starting from Pesach? And that's what is being debated here. It's a scenario where he says the whole Breita is talking about the Baal Ta'acher question. And it's talking about a scenario that you made a neder to bring a Toda. And the question is, Joe, move your foot. You're on the wire here. Thank you. You made a neder to bring a Toda. And the question is, when is your opportunity to bring it so you don't transgress Baal Ta'acher? So the first opinion said, you got to bring it on Sukkot. You can't bring it on Pesach. You can't bring it on Shavuot. You got to bring it on Sukkot. And the implication being, if you didn't bring it on the first Sukkot, you're over on Baal Ta'acher, right? If you went through Pesach and Shavuot, and now it's Sukkot, this is your one and final opportunity to bring it without being over on Baal Ta'acher. Now, in that context, what does Reb Shimon Shizuri say? So let's take a Reb Shimon say. So what does Reb Shimon say? So it says, Tanakama Sovar, Shlosh Regalim Amarachmana, Afilu Shelo Kisidron, that you have 3 regalim to bring it, and without that, you're over. So you won't be able to bring it on Pesach. You won't be able to bring it on Shavuos. You better bring it on Sukkot. And if you don't bring it on Sukkot, you blew it. And it doesn't matter what order. Sukkot is the one regal you have a chance. Now, of course, what you could do is when you go up for Shavuos, you could bring it after Shavuos. When you go up for Pesach, you could bring it a day early or a day late or something like that. But that's the context. If you're going to bring it on the regal, the one regal to bring it is Sukkot. Right, afilu shelo kisidron. Right. So Reb Shimon Sofer, now Reb Shimon holds kisidron in shelo kisidron lo, only kisidron. And how does he read it? He reads it the following. He says, if you didn't bring it, kol shelo ba b'chag hamatzos b'chag hashavuos, if you didn't bring it on Pesach and on Shavuot, then you'd better bring it. Then then eno ba. Well, how do you read the eno ba? You'll be over, I guess you read it, if you do not bring it on then Sukkot. But if you did bring, meaning it had to have been that order is the way you read it. It's still a little hard to fit into the words, but
what? This is the first night.
Yes.
You don't bring it on Sukkot. Well, you're not going to be able to bring it on Pesach, but you know that already.
Right.
So it's really your only chance. If you're determined to bring it on Moed.
Right, but that would be the Tanakama who says that you can only bring it on Sukkot, and if you're not bringing it on Sukkot, you're going to wind up basically being over. That's essentially how we're reading the Tanakama. Whereas we're reading Reb Shimon who says, no, only if it first didn't bring it on Pesach, only if you went in the order, you first didn't bring it on Pesach, and then you didn't bring it on Shavuos. So let me just see how Rashi reads the exact words. Hold on 1 minute. Kol sheba b'chag hamatzos. Okay, Rashi reads it. Rashi reads kol sheba b'chag hamatzos, meaning anything that you were already obligated to bring it. Oh, that's what you read it. If you were kol sheba b'chag hamatzos v'chag hashavuos, if you were obligated to bring it already by Pesach, and you had the opportunity to bring it by Pesach and the opportunity to bring it on Shavuos, then you'd better bring it on Sukkot. Okay, because then it's the right order. But if you didn't have the opportunity to bring it on Pesach and Shavuot, you didn't yet have your obligation then Eino Ba, you don't have to bring it this Sukkot, because you'll have another Sukkot to bring it, and you'll be able to bring it later. Okay, it's still a very funny way of articulating it, but that's the point. The first one says, you better bring it on Sukkot, the order doesn't matter, and the Reb Shimon says, only if you had the opportunity, only if the process started on Pesach, is your last chance Sukkot. But otherwise, they'll have another chance. Considering in Shelo Considering low. Rebbe Lezer Reb Shimon Omer. Now, how about Rebbe Lezer Reb Shimon? That's a different point. Maybe Adam Todas B'Chag Sukkos. You can bring your Toda on Sukkot. Okay. Now, let's take a look. So his focus of Rebbe Lezer Reb Shimon was primarily whether you fulfill your obligation in terms of whether you can use your Toda to satisfy other obligations. But we're also going to read it in the context of this debate. So let's take a look. He says, if you want to address Baal Ta'acher, you'd better bring your Toda on Sukkot. Ema. Now, when is he talking about? If he says, you better bring your Toda on Chol HaMoed Sukkos, Hainu Tanakama. So that's the Tanakama who says you had better bring it on. You can't bring it on Yontiv, on Shavuos, etc. You only can bring it on Chol HaMoed. You better bring it on Chol HaMoed Sukkos, and order doesn't matter. Ella b'Yom Tov. It must be if he's going out of his way and saying bring it on Sukkot. The only way he'd be different than the Tanakama is to tell you can even bring it on Yontiv, because Savar and Adar ben Adar was craving b'Yom Tov, and he holds that you can even bring not related shlamim on Yontiv. Now, if that's true, that he holds that you can bring it on Yantav. Again, it seems a little forced because it seems like his only point there was to discuss using a Toda to satisfy other obligations. But because he repeated this line, you bring your Toda on Sukkot, and we want to make that line different, we're going to say he means you can even bring it on Yantav of Sukkot. But if that's true, then why mention Sukkot? You could even bring it on Shavuos, right? Because you can bring it on Yantav. So Rebbe Lezer, Rebbe Shimon. So the Gemara says Rebbe Lezer, Rebbe Shimon l'taimei. He's going according to another position. Because remember, we said the whole theme here was the Baal Ta'acher's theme. The Tanya we taught in Beitzah, Rebbe Lezer, Rebbe Shimon Omer, Lo Yomar. It didn't have to say Chag HaSukkos. It could have just said B'Chag HaMatzos and B'Chag HaShavuos. Because the list of the three regalim come in the Torah at the end of mentioning all three and at the end of describing Sukkot. So why didn't it have to repeat Sukkot? It could have just said Chag HaMatzos and Chag HaShavuos. It's a pretty funny question. So Lama Nemar, why did it repeat B'Chag HaSukkot? Lomar Shezeh Acharon. To tell you that that's the last one, meaning this is Reb Shimon's position that you need kisidron, that you only are over in Baal Ta'acher when Chag HaSukkot comes at the end, when you've been through all three, starting with Pesach and ending with Sukkot. Rebbe Lezer, Reb Shimon Omer, no, even more than that. Lomer Shezeh Gorein, the only one that matters is Sukkot. You don't need the order, and not only do you not need the order, but you can start in the middle. He says once Sukkot is the only Chag where you have to bring your korbanot, and if you don't, you're over on Baal Ta'acher. So if you made a neder a day before Sukkot and you passed over Sukkot, you're over on Baal Ta'acher. If you made Sukkot's the deadline, right? Regardless of when you made your neder. You made it a day after Sukkot, you got a year to bring it. You made it a day before Sukkot, you got Sukkot to bring it. It ends by Sukkot to tell you all korbanot have to be brought by Sukkot. Pretty fascinating. Maybe it's evoking back that idea that Sukkot also, there are two calendars in the Torah. There's the one that starts with HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, where Pesach is the beginning, and the Regalim always have Pesach as the beginning, but then there's the also one, which is that Sukkot is Tkufat Hashanah, or Beitzah Hashanah, right? It's the end of the year, right? And the whole Rosh Hashanah association. So he says Sukkot is always the deadline for Korbanot, and that's why the Torah repeated Sukkot. Now, how is this relevant to us? Because it's reading his statement that he is saying you've got to bring it on Sukkot. So A, to make him different than the earlier opinions that said you can also bring it on Chol HaMoed Sukkot. We haven't been saying Yontiv of Sukkot. But if it's Yontiv of Sukkot, then you could also bring it on Shavuos. No, because remember, Rabbi said the whole context here was Baal Ta'acher. So what he's saying is, sure, if you want to bring it on Shavuos, because then to hate, but you have to bring it, when Sukkot comes along, you have to bring it on Sukkot. That is the deadline date, and there you can bring it even on the Yontiv of Sukkot. So what we have done is we've made this basically about Baal Ta'acher, and we sort of have forced into Rebbe Lezer, Rebbe Shimon, when he's saying Sukkot, to have him say Yontiv of Sukkot, to be this earlier debate about whether you can bring Shlomim on Yontiv, whether Shlomim that are not related to the Yontiv can be brought on Yontiv. But what the Gemara is primarily focused on in this context is the issue of Baal Ta'acher. So let's just repeat what we've got. Ola cannot be brought by Ola Beit Shammai debate bringing an Ola on Yontiv. The Gemara claims and has not yet questioned the idea that everybody agrees that at most an Ola's Re'iyah. But if an Ola that's a Neder and a Nedava not related to Yontiv, everybody, even Beit Hillel would agree could not be brought. Again, maybe you're not over, maybe we say mitoch, but everybody would agree cannot be brought. The big debate is the shlomim, that they're debating about smicha. But what type of shlomim are they assuming can be brought on Yontiv? So certainly shlomim that are related to the Yontiv, shlomim chagiga, presumably shlomim simcha as well. The question is shlomim that are not related to the Yontiv, can those be brought? So according to one version, that's part of the debate of Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, and according to the other version, Ula's version, no. That even Beit Hillel would also agree, since it's not related to the Yontiv, even though you're going to eat from it, cannot be brought. So that's the key question, shlomim that are not related to the Yontiv. And now we've said that's the debate going on in this Breita, which discusses bringing a Toda on Chol HaMoed Sukkot. That seems to be the idea. Agree with that idea. You do not bring shlomim on Yontiv. And then the last position of Reb Shimon that says bring it on Sukkot. Reb Lezer, Reb Shimon, that we say means even on Yontiv of Sukkot, that you can bring shlomim on Yontiv.
Everybody's bringing 3 korbanot.
In general, you bring 3 korbanot. Olas Riyah, Shlami Chagiga, and Shlami Simcha. Correct. Okay. Now the last point of Rebbe Lezer, Reb Shimon, the Yotzei Bo Mishum Simcha ve'ein Yotzei Bo Mishum Chagiga. So pshita, it's obvious you can't use your toda to satisfy your chagig obligations. Davar shebechovahu v'chol davar shebechova eina ba'ala min achulin. Your shlami chagiga is an obligation, and obligatory things can only be satisfied by things that are not already sanctified. Again, I think the bigger chiddush is that you can use it for your shlami simcha, but the Gemara says it's not a chiddush at all that you can't use your toda for your shlami chagiga. Gemara says lo tzarich lo tzricha the afal gav de parish. No, it's coming to tell you you can't use your toda for your shlami chagiga, even if you explicitly said that's what you wanted to do. What's the example? Like Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan. Omer, if somebody says, Harei alai toda ve'etzei ba'yidei chagiga. Here's this toda, I accept the obligation of a toda, but I'm going to use it to satisfy my chagiga obligations. So maybe since you stipulated at the time you took the vow, you should be able to get two for the price of one. Or somebody said, Hareini nazir, I'm going to be a nazir, but when I have to bring the korbanos of the nazir, I'll use my meiser sheni money. So you stipulated at the time you took the vow that you're going to do it with using it some other obligation to satisfy that korban. Mahu, what's the halacha? Amalei said back to him, Nadur ve'ena yotze, nazir ve'eno megaleach. The vow takes effect, and you're obligated in the toda, but you can't use it for your chagiga, and you're a nazir, but you can't use your meiser sheni money. Now, why not? You might have said it's like a masna mashakasa b'torah. You're trying to stipulate against the way the whole Torah sort of sets up the system. But then you should say, so that's one way of formulating it, where we say the t'nai, we reject the t'nai, and the basic act is binding, because the t'nai was against was contradicting halacha. The way Rashi says it is, as soon as you say the words hareini nazir, or you say the words harei alai toda, that kicks in. Those words already become effective. And then when you want to say almanas, that's already not relevant already. Your obligation kicked in and your almanas doesn't do anything. If that's true, then it's about the order. And then if you reverse the order, it might be different. And that's what we're now about to see in the next story. Let's take a look. Hu gavra da amar luhu. A certain man said to people. Now, Amar Lahu, the context is he's on his deathbed, and he's saying to all the people that are around him, and this has the halacha of matnas shchiv meira, where the Gemara said a deathbed gift, sort of like a will, is binding, and it takes effect immediately when the person says it, so that it doesn't, in order to not to upset the person who's there, with this illness and about to die. So they gave it the power of being immediately binding. So he said to the people around him, Havule arba me'azuzi leploni, give 400 zuz to a certain person, Linzer barti, and let him marry my daughter. So Amar Rav Papa, so says Rav Papa, arba mea shakil, the 400 zuz he can take, ubarte, the daughter, ibai nasiv, ibai lo nasiv. If he wants, he could marry her. If he wants, he doesn't have to marry her. Because it's two separate statements. Or because first he said the 400 zuz, and then he only said the daughter afterwards. And as soon as he said the 400 zuz, that became binding. So the Gemara says, Aval Amar Linzer ve'havule. But if he said, let him marry my daughter, and then give him 400 zuz, nasiv shakil v'lo nasiv lo shakil. If he takes it, if he marries her, he gets the money. If he doesn't marry her, doesn't get the money. Because there, the second statement that the 400 zuz was said only after the precondition of let him marry my daughter was already said, so it was only said in that context. Okay, and we'll just read one more line about this. Yossi Maremer v'kamal ha'ishmaita mishvei d'nafshe. So Maremer was telling over this discussion in his own name about the fact that, if you say the other statement, Hareini Nazir or Harei alai ola first, it's binding regardless of the condition. And Amalei Ravina leMarmeimar, and the Ravina said, Atun hachi masnisula. You teach it like as a stam teaching, like anonymous. Anan, we have this as a tradition that Rabbi Yochanan asked Reish Lakish, which is how the Gemara introduced it. So Tosfos makes the obvious connection, and Tosfos says, therefore, if somebody said, Almanas she'etzebo yedei chagiga harei alai toda, that actually that would work. That actually the stipulation could work as long as it proceeded. So for Tosfos, right, and it's not, now there's a difference. That case is against a halachic requirement. The second case is not. So this is an interesting issue. Is the problem it's like masna mashakasu batorah, or is the problem just the order in which you said it? Tosfos suggests that if you reverse the order, it actually could work based on this second story. And this really ties into halacha in Hilchos T'nayim, where you need to have t'nai kodem l'maseh. You first stipulate the condition, then you stipulate the act to make it clear that the act is only being done in the context of the pre-stated condition. Okay. That'll be it for today. Is anybody by any chance going into the Upper West Side now?